Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this webinar on using the use of time calculator. I am so excited to see so many of you joining us for this important conversation. So let's go ahead and get started right away. If you're just joining us and you haven't seen the message I've been putting in the chat, please take just a moment to complete the short pre-test that we have for you all. It's very short and easy. It should have been emailed to you, and I'm also putting it in the chat again. If you could just take a moment to complete that as we get started with introductions, that would be great. That information helps us to continue to improve the services we provide to all of you. And I like to walk the walk. When I tell you all to collect data, I also want to be collecting that important data. So please take a moment. It's very, very short. You'll also have a post-test to complete at the end of this, and that is how you will receive your professional development certificate if that interests you. So we'll get to that as we wrap up today. All right, I think that I've had the chance to meet most of you, but I'm Sarah Kirk. I'm school counselor specialist at the Oklahoma State Department of Ed, and I love all things school counseling, and I love advocating for our roles so that we can improve the services we provide to students, and that's what today is really going to be all about. So again, thank you for joining this conversation. I think it's going to be a really good one. And speaking of conversation, I can see the chat right now, so please don't hesitate to put your questions or comments or anything that you might need in the chat, and I will try to get to that as we go. Most of you know, if you've attended my presentations before, I always have great intentions of leaving time at the end for questions, but I never quite do that. I'm a little too chatty. So please ask the questions as we go. That way we can for sure get to them. And that will help us move right along. I did just get a question in the chat about that not everyone here may be school counselors. This webinar is specifically for school counselors. So if you're interested in some sort of webinar about the use of time for other school-based mental health professionals, I know that Jenna Jones is here with us today, and she might be able to put in the chat the information about that upcoming.
I did mute it. It should be muted, right?
Oh. But today's presentation is just specifically for school counselors. So you might be able to get something out of this if you're not a school counselor, but I do apologize if that was not clear. I try really hard to make sure that we know what our audience is because I want to not waste any of your time. So thank you for that. All right, so back to today's presentation. So like we said, today we're talking all things the use of time calculator and how this fits into our comprehensive school counseling programs. So today's conversation is going to be about actually using that use of time calculator, and we're going to really dive deep into how to use it. But I also hope to leave you with a really good understanding of why this is important. I don't want you to think this is just a check mark, something you do and then don't ever do anything with the information. So I really hope to really instill both of those ideas in all of us today, that we can use this tool and it can be an effective way to track our time, but also why that's important. So we'll be sure and cover both of those aspects in depth today. But as we get started, if you know me, you know I love to start with a quick welcoming and inclusion activity. So on this Tuesday morning, we're going to call it Talented Tuesday. So if you don't mind sharing in the chat, what's something you're good at, something you're talented at? It can be a unique talent or skill, or it can be something you really are just gifted at. But if you don't mind sharing in the chat on this lovely Talented Tuesday, I'd love to hear from you as we get started. Ooh, organization. Margot, I think I'm there with you for that one. Ooh, some crocheting, cooking, leather tooling. All right, if you're not looking at the chat, check it out because we have some talented school counselors. Useless information trivia. That's a good talent. I don't have that, and I've always wished I did. Oh, being a dog mom. I love it. Dog agility. We've got some dog people with us. Cool. We got a lot of listeners, which I love. TikTok obsessive. Good. Oh, Donna being a Gigi. That's sweet. Chatting over coffee. I love that. Got my coffee here, so we'll chat over it today. Chasing kiddos. Good. Oh, that's funny. Reciting facts about Russell Westbrook. I'm going up in the chat and seeing some of these. Angela, that is quite the talent. I love that. Edging, also good. Man, these are some good ones. We'll keep them coming as we get started, and make sure you go up there and read what your fellow school counselors are talented in. It's pretty impressive. So I love that. Thank you all for sharing. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. I love to start these webinars with a little bit of the data from that pretest that I've asked you to complete, so that we can really see where we are as a state and the implementation of this. I think this helps us feel not so alone. So right before we got started this morning, 110 of you had completed the pretest. And when I asked if you knew what the use of time calculator was, about 66% said yes. So we have a good amount of people who do know what it is, but we also have a big chunk that have never heard of it. And that's okay. That's exactly why we're presenting on this topic. Then when I went further and asked if you felt equipped to use the use of time calculator, the number went down that said yes to about 34%. Okay, so we know some of them knew what it was, but they don't feel equipped to use it. And then obviously here we've got a big chunk of people that don't yet feel equipped. Again, that's why we're here. So this is great information for me to help prepare for how I provide this training today. I also asked if any of you are currently already using this use of time calculator twice per school year, and very small percent, just about 13.6% said yes. So we know the vast majority of us aren't. We hope to get you ready to use it after this hour today. And then lastly, I asked that if you use the use of time calculator, do you share the results? Because again, I talked about at the beginning that we're going to be talking about that piece as well, what else we do with this information. And we just had a small percentage, it doesn't say the number there, but I want to say it was like 2 or 3% when I pulled this that said yes. So we just have just a few that are sharing the results. I think it was 6 school counselors. So we hope to get to the point where you're not only collecting this data, but sharing it so that it's useful. Data is not useful if it just sits on our computers and we don't ever do anything with it. So we're hoping to change this here today. So again, I like to share this information just so that you're aware that if this is brand new to you, or if at any time during this presentation it feels a bit overwhelming, you are in good company. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to reach out if you need additional help. We're all in this together, and this is brand new to most of us. All right, so today's presentation will be talking all things use of time. We're going to talk about where this fits into our Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counseling Framework. We're going to really dive into the calculator. In order to understand the calculator, we need to have a clear understanding of some of our different roles as school counselors, our direct and indirect student services, and what's considered appropriate and inappropriate school counseling activities. You have to know that because that's how we pick which category our time fits into. So we're going to make sure we talk a little bit about that to have a clear understanding about those different categories. And then we'll talk about how to use it, how to share it, and then we'll reflect and summarize. And hopefully I get all of this done in the next 51 minutes. So let's get started. All right, so like we said, many of you this is new to, and that's because our Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counseling Framework was just published last October. We're officially 1 year old, but we're still in the process of implementation, and we will be for many years. There's research to show that true implementation of a comprehensive school counseling program can take 3 to 5 years to implement. And so we are not trying to do this overnight. We're working together and taking baby steps and knowing that it's a process, and it's meant to be a process. If we did it all right away, it wouldn't be done with fidelity. and it most likely wouldn't be all that effective. So we're taking this one step at a time, and today's step is this use of time calculator. But I want to make sure you understand where that fits into our bigger picture plan as we work to implement comprehensive school counseling. So as you've probably heard me say, our framework is a research-based framework based on the Ask a National model. The outcomes are to have positive student outcomes in student achievement, attendance, and discipline. That's the goal. And we picked the Ask a National model because it's evidence-based to do just that. So we know that when we implement comprehensive school counseling programs that are comprehensive in scope and that are based on this framework, then we're able to make data-informed decisions. We're able to serve all students and in a developmentally appropriate way. We close those achievement and opportunity gaps. And then again, most importantly, we're improving those student outcomes in achievement, attendance, and discipline. So all of this is kind of that why behind the implementation piece. So our framework is made up of these 4 components: define, manage, deliver, and assess. And the manage component, we've been doing quite a bit of training on. So if you've come to any of our other trainings, our back to school series, our data series, we really have been diving deep into this manage component. And you can see there highlighted that, again, this use of time tool still falls under that manage component. And within the manage component, I call it the behind the scenes work, because it's how we put things in place to more effectively and efficiently manage our school counseling programs. When you go back to this slide, that deliver component, which we will be doing a series on deliver soon, which I'll talk more about at the end today, but delivers the important stuff. That's that actual work we do with and on behalf of students. However, if we don't effectively first manage our program, then typically the deliver component is less effective. We're not delivering services that are as strong as they could be. So this behind the scenes piece of this manage component is really important, and we don't want to miss out on that important piece so that we can be more effective for our students. So again, here you can see that the manage component includes quite a bit of different pieces, and we've talked about these at various times through these presentations. But again, you'll see there that today we're going to be focusing on this use of time piece that really helps us in our program planning. So when we talk about use of time, I want to make sure that we all have a good understanding of what I mean when I say that. So in our framework and in the Ask a National model, it's recommended that school counselors spend at least 80% of their time in direct and indirect services to students. And again, we're going to talk about how we define direct and indirect services to students. But I want you to first get that number down, that 80%, because that's our goal. Now, we know we're probably not there yet, and that's okay, but that's what we're shooting for. So if we're not there yet, we're going to slowly work towards increasing that direct and indirect time to get closer to that 80%. But keep that number in your mind, because we'll talk about it several times today. When we talk about the use of time calculator, what it does is it just provides a snapshot of how school counselors spend their time in each of the components of our framework. Now, I say it's a snapshot because you only are going to collect your use of time data twice per school year, once in the fall and once in the spring. So we're not doing this every single week or every single day to really see exactly how our time is spent. Now you could, but it wouldn't be recommended, because then we would be spending too much of our time tracking our use of time, which just seems kind of counterproductive. So instead, we're just going to get this snapshot. And I often get questions about that, because what if it's a unique week, or what if that week is different than the next week? And that happens. Ideally, we're going to select 2 weeks that are the most typical. So don't select the week that you have, a big field trip or a big food drive or something that takes up a lot of your time, because we want to pick a week that's most typical to our normal weeks in order to get that snapshot. So keep that in mind as we go as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the use of time calculator. So like we said, the idea is that this is a document that helps us look at really how we're spending our time, and especially look at how we're spending our time on school counseling activities, appropriate school counseling activities versus those non-school counseling activities. Again, to help us advocate for our role as comprehensive school counselors. Again, this idea of a time study is just a snapshot of our time. It's not going to be a day-to-day, week-to-week thing. And like I already said, we understand that every week may not look the same, but this idea of a time study still gives us really powerful data about how we're spending our time. And it can kind of be used to guide those future decisions about how to more effectively spend our time, even though it's just a snapshot. We know through research that when we don't formally track our time, school counselors have a really warped view on how we are actually spending our time. There's been some neat studies out there that have asked school counselors about their guess on how they were spending their time, and then actually asked them to track their time, and they were not very accurate in their guesses because, well, it's just hard to know. And it's hard. We can feel like we're doing more of one thing, but once we actually track it, it can be quite different. So that's why we want to formally track our time just the twice per year to get a more accurate viewpoint of how our days and weeks are being spent. All right, so like I said, it's recommended that we use this use of time calculator at least twice each year. So ideally once in the fall and once in the spring to give us a snapshot of our time throughout the year. Now we know our time is one of our most valuable tools, right? It's something we never ever have enough of in education. And so the more we can become intentional about how we spend our time, we know our services can improve, and we know that we can impact students more effectively. And we're going to talk about the advocacy side of all of this, because I'm not here to tell you that magically tracking your time means that all those non-school counseling duties will magically be taken away. Unfortunately, it's not quite that easy. But I am here to tell you that it's a step towards that advocacy. And I can tell you several examples of this in my school counseling experience. But the first thing we have to do before we can use it as an advocacy tool is collect it, right? So we need to get that piece down first, and then we can start looking at how this can be a tool to help us better spend our time, more effectively and efficiently spend our time. All right, so what is this use of time calculator that I keep speaking of? Well, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So for all my Excel fans out there, you'll be happy. It is an Excel spreadsheet. For my non-Excel fans like myself, luckily it's a template that it calculates everything for you. So it's a pretty easy to use, friendly Excel spreadsheet. We're going to take a look at it here in a bit, but you'll see once we start playing with it that the template calculates all the totals. It even graphs it for you. So it makes it into these beautiful, easy to read graphs that can help you look at how you're spending your time. Again, we're going to talk about how you could share that with stakeholders. So all of that piece is really easy. Now I see Amy in the chat. Perfect timing, Amy, thank you. Because I was going to mention some other options for time tracking, because this use of time calculator is not the only one out there. This is the one that's in our framework, and it's free and it's easy, and we're going to spend most of our time talking about it today. But there are others out there. Like Amy said, she's been using Clockify, which is a free website to track time. She does it daily. And Amy, if it's easy to use daily and you're liking that, then that's totally fine. What I wouldn't recommend doing every day is the use of time calculator, because we're going to take a look at it in a minute, and it can be a little bit, it can take time to do it, because it's really breaking your day up into small increments, and I just don't want you wasting time doing that. But Amy, if you have a system and you want to do it daily, go for it. And then Riley said, I use SCUDA, and look at the screen. I love SCUDA too, and that's another option for time tracking. Tina built her own Google form. We have innovative, smart, lovely school counselors out there, and I love it. So all of those are great as well. ASCA has an ASCA National Model app. It's free for members, and it has a time tracking tool. That has been, that was just released, I believe, a year and a half ago. And so I have not used that one because I haven't been in the school setting since that came out, but I've heard great things. So you can go to your app store and search ASCA National Model, and you can get that, and it's free if you're a member of ASCA. SCUDA, which Rayleigh mentioned, and I know we have many schools counselors out there. I talked to many of you at the OSDE conference about SCUDA. I'm a big fan of SCUDA as well. That's another platform that you can use to track your time, and you can do a quick Google search and find that. It does cost, but it is free for the first month. So if you want to try it out, you can. And SCUDA does many other things beyond tracking your time as well. So it's a great platform, and maybe you could advocate for getting your school or district to pay for your membership there if you want to use it beyond the first month. And I wanted to hear from others of you that you have used, and I'm already seeing lots in the chat. So great, Tina and Amy, thank you for sharing. So yeah, we don't want, Megan mentioned that she too much time, spending way too much time. Oh yeah. Yeah, so that's what I'm catching up on the chat, that you all, it's a good way to show that you're spending too much time doing other things, which is what we're here to talk about today. Absolutely. So Audra also uses Clockify. Does someone mind sharing in the chat if you're using Clockify? Is that a free service? I haven't heard of that one.
Yes, it's free.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So yeah, check that out too. That's why I wanted to hear from you all's ideas. So there is not a right or wrong way to track your time. I am 100% on board if you want to use some of these other options. Like I said, we're talking mostly about the use of time calculator today because that's what's in our framework, and that is just an easy, free way to do it. But if you have others, please use it. Okay, good. Oh, Becca's used it too. So Becca Dameron Whitehead is here with us today, and she is on my team at the SDE. And so she's used it. So if you have any questions, you could reach out to her. I'm sure she'd be willing to help you as a experienced Clockify user as well. Karen, am I right to assume that halftime? Oh, okay, I see. So Karen is asking, it looks like she's a halftime school counselor. So yes, you would still want 80% of your time to be direct and indirect student services, but your time is just halftime. So 20 hours a week. So whatever 80% of that, but yes. All right, awesome. Well, keep your thoughts coming in the chat. It looks like Amy shared a little bit more about Clockify if you're interested, and Becca is willing to help. So we've got another idea there if that's something you would rather use as well. All right, so no matter what tracking form you use, one thing that's really important is that we understand these different categories, because when we take a look at the use of time calculator in a minute, you're going to see that it's asking you to say, were you providing, what type of services were you providing? What were you doing during that time? And if you don't clearly understand the difference in all of these categories, then your use of time data won't be accurate, right? So we want to make sure we understand these categories so that we're saying that we're spending our time in the accurate ways. So I just want to briefly go over what direct and indirect student services are, how we define those, and we'll talk more about it when we take a look at our template here in a minute as well. But essentially, to put it as easy as possible, direct student services are when we're face-to-face with students. Okay, so when we're face-to-face with students and we're providing either instruction, which is when we're teaching a new skill. So when we're going in to do classroom lessons, when we're doing a small group about emotion management skills, when we're providing any type of instruction, then that is a direct student service. When we're providing appraisal and advisement, which is fancy words for most of that college and career work we do, that's a direct student service. And then when we're providing that short-term counseling that we can provide to students, that's a direct student service, okay? So those three areas, instruction, appraisal and advisement, and counseling are our direct student services. So we're face-to-face with kids and we're providing a service. Now, where people get held up sometimes with direct student services is they think that if they are face-to-face with a student at, let's say, lunch duty, it would be a direct student service. And that gets a little sticky. Jenna and I were talking about this yesterday, because if you are providing short-term instruction or counseling in that lunch duty moment, it might be a direct student service. But most likely it's not, because although you're face-to-face with students, you're not providing a counseling service to them. And we'll talk more about that as we go, but kind of start wrapping your head around those three categories: instruction, appraisal and advisement, and counseling. That's our umbrella of direct student services. Now, then we have those indirect student services that are really important too. And I think sometimes we underestimate how important these are, because this is what we do on behalf of students. So think of this as that work where we're no longer face-to-face with students, but we're helping students. So this is when we're collaborating with teachers about ways that they could improve their classroom management skills in order for students to be more successful. Or we're consulting with caregivers about what's going on at home and how we can better serve the student at school. Or we're making a referral to mental health agency, or to get an eye exam, or to a pediatrician, or whatever that may be. So those three areas of collaboration, consultation, and referrals is that indirect student services umbrella. All right, so those are the things we do on behalf of students. And remember that 80% number. We want 80% of our time to be in direct and indirect. And I know I'm going to get the question, so I'm going to answer it first. How much should be direct and how much should be indirect? There's not an answer to that. ASCA very specifically doesn't give that answer, because it depends on your situation. So let me give an example. If you're in a school that provides a really robust curriculum on helping students build their life skills and well-being skills, if they do ICAP in the classroom, if your school has some of those things built into your classrooms, then you as the school counselor might provide less direct student services, because your job is more helping teachers implement those programs. So you're providing a really needed skill, but your teachers might be providing the direct student service. Or maybe you're in a school that ICAP and SEL and none of those pieces really happen at the classroom level. Your teachers aren't yet doing much of that. Then you might need to provide more direct student services, because you need to be the one teaching the instruction. Okay, does that make sense? So it's not going to be clear cut how much of that 80% should be direct and how much should be indirect. It all depends on your school situation. Okay, I'm gonna pause right there, see if anyone has any questions about that, because it's a little bit tricky. I'll give another example as you kind of wrap your head around that. I worked at a school that I had no one on my team except my principal and myself. And then I worked at a school where I had a social worker, an assistant principal, a behavior interventionist, and another school counselor, and a whole team of us worked together. So my direct and indirect student services looked really different at those two schools, because I had a whole team one place and I only had myself another place. So at the school that it was only me, I did way more indirect student services, because instead of spending all my time trying to run around to every classroom and do all the things, I instilled that in teachers and had them help me. So hopefully that's how you can kind of think about that. Yeah, Amanda, so it'll depend on what your situation looks like. So Amanda, if you have a whole team working together, then your indirect might be higher, or it may not. It may, but just think, don't get too worried about how much at each percent, how much at direct and how much at indirect. Instead, worry about that 80% at direct and indirect. All right, let's keep going. All right, I think that's what this slide says, is that I've already said all of that, but I do want to talk about that remaining 20%. We've talked a lot about the 80%, right, and the direct and indirect student services, but the remaining 20% is ideally in that program manage and school support. So this is when we do the things like defining, managing, and assessing our school counseling program. So the use of time tool, the time you spend using that is manage. Remember, it falls under the manage component. So when you're spending your time tracking your use of time, that falls in that 20%. That's program management. We talked in our summer series about creating calendars. When you're spending time updating your calendars, that falls in that 20% because that's managing your program. If you're collecting data on your small group, and then you have to spend some time assessing that data, looking at that data, that falls in that 20%. That's program management, falls under that assessing task. Okay, yeah, I mean, we can talk about that in just a minute if you're still kind of getting the categories down. Again, that's one reason we wanted to really talk about those different categories today. Okay, so ideally 20% of our time's in that program management. Now, we do know that a small portion of this 20% would be what we call fair share responsibilities. Fair share responsibilities, just like the name sounds, are those things we do in the school, like lunch duty, recess duty, pickup duty, morning greeting time, hallway duty, those kind of things, but we're doing a fair share of them. So this is important because fair share means you have the same amount as other educators in the building. So I can see Deborah on the screen, so I'm going to pick on Deborah a little bit. So if Deborah is doing a lunch duty a week and a afternoon pickup duty a week, and that is the same as the third grade teachers in her school, then she's just doing fair share responsibility. She's not doing any more or any less. And as a school counselor, as an educator, as a member of the school team, we want to do our fair share. So that would fall under that 20% program management and school support. Now, if Deborah was doing lunch duty every day for all grades and morning duty every day from 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock, but her teachers in the building aren't doing that much duty, that's beyond fair share, right? That means Deborah's being used beyond her scope, and then that would fall under a non-school counseling duty. And we'll take a look at that on the use of time calculator. But do you understand the difference? It's not non-school counseling to do a duty or two a week. That's fair share. But when we're used beyond that, it becomes a non-counseling duty. Marie, we're going to talk about that here in a bit, but if we're serving as a substitute teacher, that's a non-school counseling duty. That's not within our scope, even when there's not enough teacher subs. So, and that's, I know we have to do our part sometimes, but serving as a substitute is not an appropriate duty. So we'll talk more about that as we go. And Jenna, thank you. If anyone was wondering, yes, you will get a copy of these slides in my follow-up email. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit. We've talked most of this, I think. Let me scan. Okay, we've talked about all of that, so I'm going to keep on going. All right, and just a reminder, that 80 number. So that's our goal. We're not going to be there right away. If you all go back and do the use of time calculator next week, I can guarantee you'll probably be far from the 80%. That's okay. We're just keeping that number in mind because that's what we're hoping to get to, right? That's our end goal. And that's what the ideal is. And so we want to make sure we keep that in mind so that we can use this data effectively. If we don't have a number in mind of what this data should look like, then it's just going to be kind of useless data, right? We want to know what we're looking for so that we can look to improve. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about those non-school counseling tasks. We've already covered this a little bit, but now that we understand what direct and indirect student services are, let's talk what falls under this non-school counseling tasks. So like we said, these are the things that we consider inappropriate tasks. And that's because this is all based on data. This is all based on research that shows that school counselors are equipped to provide direct and indirect student services. That's why we're there. But unfortunately, as we all know, we become kind of the ones that take on all the other things at times. And that's how we rack up these many inappropriate tasks at times. So I always like to start with the idea of understanding that the reason these are inappropriate tasks, what we're going to talk about, is because we are equipped, we are trained, we are educated to provide direct and indirect student services. That's why we're there. So keep that piece in mind, okay? Because if we're not spending our time in classrooms, running small groups, providing one-on-one support, doing appraisal and advisement, all those pieces, collaborating with our teachers, then it's hard for us to argue that we shouldn't be doing some of these inappropriate tasks, right? So keep in mind what our role is, and then that way we can work to get those other things removed. We can't get testing removed if we're not doing our appropriate tasks. Does that make sense? So keep that piece in mind as we go as well. All right, so we know that, like I said at the beginning, doing the use of time calculator will not magically make all of our non-school counseling tasks be removed, but it's a step in the right direction and we have to start somewhere. So keep that in mind as we go as well. You've probably seen this document before, but if you haven't, this is a part of our comprehensive school counseling framework. And it's also a standalone document. I think, Jenna, do you mind putting a link in the chat to this document from our website, the standalone one? So you can find this one individually as well. Now, I always give a warning before I show this document or before I share the link, because this isn't a document that we print out and we go sit on our principal's desk and we say, this is what I should be doing and this is what I shouldn't be doing. That's not effective or appropriate advocacy. But I do want us to understand what our appropriate roles are and what our inappropriate roles are, because I truly think this starts with us. I think that there are school counselors out there that don't know the difference between appropriate and inappropriate, and that's okay. Remember, this is new to us, but we have to understand it in order to help educate others on it. If we don't have a good understanding of it, how can we expect our principals who aren't trained school counselors to understand it? So I love this document because it doesn't just say what we shouldn't be doing. It takes what we shouldn't be doing and aligns it with what we should be doing. Jenna put the link to ours in the chat if you'd like to pull this up. But again, don't start printing and slamming it on any principal's desks yet. Bear with me for a minute. But like, who was it? Marie said, is substituting, where would substituting fall? And right here, covering classes when teachers are absent or to create teacher planning time is an inappropriate activity for school counselors. But there are other things that we can do that are more appropriate. So keep that in mind as well, okay? So let's look at, I know one I get a lot is testing. Where's testing on here? Maybe it's too far down. Anyway, but here it is. Coordinating testing programs right here, third from the top, is not an appropriate activity. But what is appropriate for school counselors is interpreting that test result and being a part of the team who's looking at the testing data. I think sometimes as school counselors, we're like, nope, don't want to touch it, not our job. And then we're going almost too far in the other direction. Same with IEPs and 504s and that sort of thing. It may not be our appropriate role to coordinate those, But look what is appropriate. Advocating for students at those meetings. Absolutely, being at the table is important. And so this document is great because it helps us understand that while there are pieces that may not be as appropriate, we are engaged in the process to some degree, right? So keep this in mind. And again, we're not here to talk fully about this today, but I wanted to make sure we understand it because when it comes to the use of time calculator, we are going to have to put in when something's a non-counseling duty. So we need to have a good understanding of what would be considered a non-counseling duty. All right. I think I've covered all of this. And again, you'll have these slides, but this helps us talk through thinking about advocacy efforts when it comes to removing non-school counseling duties. And so again, we'll talk more about this at another time, but I did want you to have this information because we don't throw that document on principals' desks and say, these are non-school counseling tasks. This lists things we can do to work towards that advocacy. And one of them is using the data from the use of time calculator to look at how you're spending your time, right? So that's why this is all together. And this process listed here shows that, it's not going to be an overnight change where we get these duties removed. It doesn't happen like that. Our principals, even, they're well-intentioned and they want us to be able to do our job too, but they have to find people to give those tasks to. And this really outlines that it's going to take time, but we have to do our part too. And one part of our part is having data to show how we're spending our time versus how we should be spending our time. All right. Okay, so, and just as we kind of close up on this, the why behind this, then I wanted to also show here our ASCA ethical standards, which are the ethical standards all school counselors should abide by, does state that it is within our ethical standards to advocate for our role and to advocate for the appropriate use of our time. And you can see that listed here. And so this is, again, just reiterating why it's up to us to look at how we're spending our time and to begin advocating for a more appropriate use of our time. All right, I'm going to pause because I see a couple of questions. Michelle asked what a week looks like. We can talk about that. Michelle, we have some examples of calendars in our framework, and we did quite a bit of training on those use of calendars and what weeks can look like, so I can provide that information to you. And Alexis asks about when non-counseling tasks take up the majority of our time. And you've already expressed these concerns to admin. Well, my first suggestion is to do the use of time calculator so that we can have really hard data to show how we're using our time. So I recommend you doing a full week of what we're talking about today. And then we're going to talk kind of at the end today about how we can start, continue those conversations with admin with our data and saying, like I said, we're not going to have that 80% right away, especially if you're constantly subbing classes. So maybe, Alexis, when you do your use of time calculator, it might show that you're doing like 20% direct and indirect student services. So I would talk with your principal about trying to get that up to 30%. We're not going to shoot for 80% at that point, right? We're going to set smaller goals. Also, Alexis, I did a presentation during the summer series in September about the administrative conference. That is a really great advocacy tool. It's a formal meeting that we can have with our principals to talk about these concerns and to talk about our goals in our school counseling program and what we can do to get there. So those would be my two recommendations for you, Alexis. Use the use of time calculator, calculate that formal data, and consider the administrative conference. When I send out the email following this, I'll make sure you all have links to all of those things. It's also at the end of this slide deck, and you'll have a copy of that. Tammy asked, do we do a full week 2 times a year? Yes, Tammy, we do 1 full week in the fall and 1 full week in the spring. That's as frequent as I recommend using the use of time calculator, Tammy. Otherwise, it becomes a little too intensive. So that's what we talked about the beginning, that this is just a snapshot, but we want to pick a week that's as normal as possible, whatever normal means in school counseling, and do that just those 2 times a year. If you want to do it an additional time, you're welcome to. And I know some people said they use some of those other resources more regularly, but as far as the use of time calculator, I just recommend doing it twice. Yes, Vicki, we do talk about all of this with administrators as well. We present at administrator conferences. We present to administrators and districts, and we do a lot of that sort of training because we understand this starts with the administrator. I also firmly believe that it starts with school counselors having the conversations with administrators as well. So that's why we want to give you these tools to have good data to take to those conversations. And again, Vicki, like I was telling Alexis, that annual administrative conference, it is so often skipped, but I promise you it will make a difference as we work to advocate with our administrators. Yes, Audra, thank you for saying that. Yeah, we have to learn to say no. Thank you for you all saying that. Great idea. Okay. Dixie, bear with me. We're going to get to what falls under what. Oh, you all have such great questions. Yes, Denny, we're going to get to that as well. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I think a lot of your questions I'm going to answer. So let's get going and then we will continue with your questions. Thank you. Keep them coming. All right, so let's talk about how to use the calculator because I think that's what a lot of your questions are about, some of the categories and that sort of thing. Okay, so when you pull up the template, you will see that the instructions on how to use it are in the Google document. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. When you open this link, this is going to open an Excel document, okay? Jenna already put the link in the chat. That's a great link to star or favorite or whatever you need to do. That's the one I just put in the chat. That's where all the templates are. But this one, the first one I put, will directly open an Excel document. So you can start getting that open if you'd like. And when you get that open, you're going to see these instructions on one of the tabs of the Excel document. So you don't have to memorize all of this or take these notes. That's on there. I just put them into the slide deck as well. So we are going to track our time by 15-minute time increments, which is why I don't recommend doing this more than twice a year because it is really detailed, but it's detailed on purpose. And again, keeping in mind, you're only doing it twice per year. So we're just going to put an X in the boxes of how we've spent our time and don't do anything else. Otherwise, the graph won't graph correctly. Okay, so you just are going to use an X and we'll take a look about this in a second. And again, like I said, it all calculates it for you. There's a charts tab at the bottom that once you start filling this out, it's going to auto populate into those charts. There's also a sample included on the template, so you can use that kind of for your reference as well. So be sure and don't alter any of the formulas or anything, otherwise it will mess up your data. But otherwise, it's super easy to use. We're just going to be putting X's into the boxes. So I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to take a look at it so we can pull it up all together. All right. Uh-oh, Crystal, let me see what's going on there. Anyone else having that problem?
I did, but then I exited out and went to another window because it popped up in the Excel sheet.
Okay. Yeah, some computers might have a hard time with the automatic Excel download if there's like protections on your computer. So you might go to this link instead, the one that goes straight to our templates. Go to that one first, and then you can then go to click on the use of time calculator. Maybe try it that way. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see my screen here. And we're going to go through this. Okay. So as you can see here, Like I said, it's broken up into 15-minute increments. I already see Amanda has a question about changing the times. If she works 8 to 5. And I will have to check on that, Amanda, because I'm pretty sure if you change the time, well, if you just change these times, that's okay. You can change the times in the boxes, but you'll need to keep it with the 15-minute increments. Otherwise, your calculations are going to get off. Okay. And I can help you with that, Amanda. You can email me and we can work on that. And okay, so let's start from the top. First, I want to show you here on this first tab, those are those directions. So we were looking at those on the slides, but they're all the same right here. So you don't have to keep notes or anything like that. You've got the instructions here in case you forget anything we've talked about. You've got a sample here in case you want to go back and look at an example. And then you have a tab for each day. So each day of your 1 week in the fall and then your 1 week in the spring, you'll chart differently. Okay. So you're going to do one day, you just do all of Monday on this tab. And then, like we said, go on from day to day. Then as you start filling it out, it's going to start making a beautiful chart. And it doesn't look very beautiful right now because there's no data in there. But once you start putting things in, it's going to just make a beautiful pie chart for you to show how you're spending your time. Okay. So let's go back to an example. And I know there's going to be so many questions about where certain things fall, and we're going to do our best to get through all of them. But I did see a question early in the chat about the difference between instruction, appraisal, and advisement and counseling. Now, keep in mind, we do have that Deliver counseling series coming up in November. We're doing a 3-part series where it's all about direct student services. So if these words are new to you, please come to those webinars because we don't have time in our 1 hour today to dive too deep into that. But I'm going to go over it quickly, but just know if that's new to you, all of it's in our framework and we have more professional development to come. The quick summary, like we talked about earlier, is instruction is when we're providing instruction. So this is typically when we're going into classrooms, when we're running small groups, when we're teaching a new skill. Okay, think of that as instruction. This is when we're being the most like teachers, right? This is when we're teaching a new skill. Appraisal and advisement, you can think of that as college and career readiness. So when we're doing those different tasks that we provide, appraisal being that piece where we're having students look at future options, and then advisement where we're providing advisement on their future options. Again, fancy words for college and career. That third direct student services counseling. So that's when we're using our counseling skills to provide some sort of short-term counseling. Now, counseling can occur in a small group. It's not always one-on-one. So, but if you do a small group on grief, then that's probably a counseling small group. So that would be the direct student service of counseling. Now, again, we're going to dive way, way deeper into the difference between those three in that delivery series. So bear with me if that's new to you. And again, all of that information is within our framework. The indirect student services, if you have a hard time defining the difference between three, well, that's okay, because look, they're all in the same category on this one. So remember, those indirect student services are those services we're providing on behalf of students, okay? So that's when we're working with teachers and caregivers and principals to do different things to help support students. When we're helping create a calm down spot in the classroom, when we're talking about how to change a student's day to more effectively meet their needs, when we're doing all of that type of work. Child study team, I think I saw PLCs, that would probably fall under this, because if you're working with other educators to better serve students, then that's an indirect student service. Program planning and school support. So remember, okay, these we want to be 80%, right? Direct and indirect, we want the total to be 80. Now we want this program planning and school support to be 20. So that's when we're defining, managing, assessing, and then those fair share responsibility activities. Remember, we talked about if you're only doing the same amount of duty as other teachers, then we would put that there. Now, our non-school counseling tasks is when we're subbing classrooms, when we're doing way too much duty, when we're administrating testing, when we're coordinating 504s. Those are non-school counseling tasks, and those would go here. And if you have questions about that, you can refer back to that document we put in there in the chat earlier, okay? So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back to our slides, and I know you have a lot of questions. If you all I see that some of you are having issues. I'm guessing it's an issue with the version of Excel that you have, but I'll work with you. I'll send an attachment to our to the email follow-up. So just bear with me if you're having issues. I'm guessing it's your Excel is old, but I'll help you out and we'll figure it out together. That's what we do. Okay, let me go back. I know I'm running so short on time, so let me get back. It's because you all have had great questions, which I really appreciate. This is good stuff. So, all right, again, you can find the template there, and if you're having issues with it, I will help you out. All right, so we've talked a little bit about those categories. We have the direct student services, the indirect student services. You can see here where it points to which part of our framework it is. So you can see there, and that's where those fall. Then we've talked about each of these, so I'm going to keep on going. Okay, now here's our little activity we're going to do to help you all with all your questions you have about where specific things would fall, because I see all your questions in the chat. So this is a little quiz. Let's see how we can do. So where do you think these activities would go? If you think you know, you can put the answer in the chat. All right, a meeting with caregivers. So you've got parents coming in and you're having a meeting about how to meet the needs of their student. Indirect, good job, Marie and Shonda, very good. All right, classroom counseling lesson on goal setting. Where do you think that would be? Direct, good. You all are good. What type of direct though? Remember, our direct is broken up into instruction, counseling, and okay, there we go. Good job. You guys are getting an A+. Yes, I'm providing a classroom counseling lesson on goal setting. I'm teaching a new skill. It's instruction. Good. All right, number 3, data collection. On that goal setting lesson, I did a pre and post test, and now I've got to spend some time analyzing the data. What would that fall under? Marie's right, program planning. Yeah, it's that defining, managing, assessing activities. Good. That one's a little tricky, but that's on the defining, managing, assessing, program planning. Good. All right. Helping a teacher set up a calming corner in their classroom. Good. Indirect. Yep. That would probably be collaboration. Good, Laura-Lee. Yep. But luckily on that indirect, you don't have to pick. So good, Carissa. Very good. All right. Small group on emotion management. Teaching students about emotion management. It's direct. Good. Do we think it's instruction, counseling, or appraisal and advisement? Oh, okay. Got a lot of counseling. I would have put this one in instruction. Now, let me tell you why. Because I'm teaching a skill on emotion management. Now, if it was more like based on grief emotions, or managing transitions, or managing a divorce, or something that is more counseling focused, then it might be. But a general group on emotion management would most likely be instruction, because we're teaching a skill. But it could go either way. So good job. Good paying attention. All right. What about creating your annual calendar? This one's a little trickier. Good, Rayleigh, it's program management. Yeah, that's that defining, managing, and assessing activities. Yep, that's that program management. The behind the scenes work, remember that we talk about program management. Good. Lunch duty once a week. Fair share, good. Yep, fair share. Okay. Support for a student who just moved and parents are going through a divorce. Got a new student, just got here because parents going through a divorce. Good. Counseling. Yeah, direct counseling. Good, good, good. Coordinating state testing. What do we think coordinating state testing would fall under? Good. Non-school counseling tasks. Good. Analyzing the results of an interest inventory in a small group. This one's a little tricky. Let's see. Ah, Mary, good job. Appraisal and advisement. Ooh, okay. I can see why you all might think this would be indirect. Let me talk about what I meant here. I meant that we were analyzing the results of the interest inventory with my small group. So my small group all took an interest inventory, and now we're going over the results together. Let me rephrase it. And Mary's right. It would be appraisal and advisement because we're assessing the results, going over the results together. It would be indirect if I was looking at the results on my own. So good job, Marie and Marcia and Rayleigh, who caught me on that one. Good. Okay. If you do lunch duty every day, unlike teachers, yes, that goes under non-school counseling tasks, America. So if it gets beyond fair share, it goes to non-school counseling tasks. What I would do on that, America, is on one day a week, I would count it as fair share because, or however many days most teachers have, I would count as fair share. So say every teacher in your building has 2 lunch duties or 2 duties a week. 2 of them I would put on yours, on your use of time under fair share. The additional ones beyond fair share would go under non-school counseling tasks. Great question, Dixie. Training like this webinar. Does anyone have any guesses where that would go? No one has any guesses for you, Dixie, so I'll help. Okay. Okay, Dixie, let's talk through this. If you're attending a webinar for managing your program, we would call it defining, managing, and assessing activities. Okay, so that would be that program management piece. However, if you're giving a lesson, or I'm sorry, not a lesson, I read something in the chat. If you're giving a PD to your staff, that would probably fall under collaboration and consultation because you're providing that to your staff and collaborating together. So PD in general isn't always the same, okay? But if you're attending PD, we typically would call that program planning, okay? But you can, when you do professional development, consider that consultation and collaboration if you ever present on like trauma-informed practices, that sort of thing. Okay, I know I'm already over time and some of you are messaging me that you have to go, and I totally understand if you have to go. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and keep going so that we have this recording. And if you need to check the rest of this recording, then we can do so. I know we have lots of individual questions, but I'm going to keep going because I want to make sure we get through all of this, and I will be around to answer your individual questions. We're going to get through this together. It's a learning process for all of us. But let's make sure that we understand the how to share this use of time. Like I said, this is going to take some time to gather this data, and I want to make sure that you're using it effectively, because I don't want you to use the use of time calculator and then it to sit on your computer and never do anything productive. So we talked about the annual administrative conference. This use of time information is included on there because ideally when you have that annual administrative conference, you're sharing your use of time at that time. So if that annual administrative conference is news to you, I did a whole webinar on that, and you'll get that link following this webinar, but that's a great way to share it. If you aren't going to have the annual administrative conference, or if you already had it, we still want to make sure we're sharing this information with our stakeholders. So if that means setting up a meeting with your principal to share this data, if it means taking it to your next team meeting that you have, whatever needs to be done, we want to make sure our principals are seeing this data and understanding what we want it to look like ideally, okay? Because again, if we're not advocating for ourselves, it's not likely that we're going to get some of these inappropriate duties removed. So we need to make sure that we're having these conversations. Also it's important that if we do get inappropriate duties removed, like I talked to a school counselor recently who was able to get 504 coordination removed from their caseload, and she was about to use the use of time calculator to show how different her time looks now. And that's just as important. She's going to take that back to her principal and say, look, this is a celebration. Now I'm, closer to that 80% direct and indirect. And I think often we forget that piece, but we want to make sure that we're showing the difference we're making in the lives of students when we do get those small things removed. And maybe it won't be 504 coordination completely removed, but maybe I always give the example of my experience. I didn't ever get testing removed when I was in Norman, but I got my principal to add a second person to help me coordinate it. So I shared with her my use of time in March after she gave me a testing coordination buddy, because it improved. I got to still run small groups in March once I had someone to help me. So I wanted to really show her that made a difference. I'm seeing some questions about PD certificates. Yes, there is one. I said at the beginning, when you complete the post test, I can give you the certificate. And so it will be in the follow-up email, and I'll also share it as soon as I get there if you're able to stay with us. Thank you for your patience. All right, so just again in reflection, making sure we're thinking of creative ways of sharing this information, to use this as an advocacy tool, to make sure it's something that really helps us continue that conversation about how we can effectively serve our students. So here are some reflection questions. If these would be helpful when you're meeting with your principal as well, you're welcome to use them. I've used these three before. They come straight from the Ask a National model, but they're really good reflection questions. First one states, what are the most significant difficulties for reaching 80% of your time in direct and indirect student services? So, those of you who said you're covering classes or doing a lot of duties, this would be a good way to talk about those difficulties you're having with your principal. Second question states, which of those difficulties can you most effectively work to change this year? So if you have a lot of barriers right now, if you are testing and 504s and EL and gifted and duties, and you've got the laundry list, start small. What's one area you think you could effectively work towards changing this year, and start there, okay? And talk through what that could look like with your principal. And then the last question, what can you do this year to address that one challenge? What could that look like? What could your role as the school counselor be? How could your principal partner with you? And what could we do to move the needle forward ever so slightly, right? If you use that use of time tool calculator and you're at 20% direct and indirect services, do not set your goal to be 80%, okay? I've said that already, but I just want to really reiterate that. Set your goal to be 30% by the spring, right? We want to set manageable goals. We want to have these reflection conversations and just talk about how we can slowly move the needle forward. So in summary, like we've said, we want to calculate our use of time at least twice per year, ideally once in the fall and once in the spring. We want to share the results with our administrators and our school leaders, and we want to spend time discussing our strengths, what's looking really good, and where our areas for improvement are. We want to consider connecting some of these dots we've talked about. How can we use our weekly calendars to reflect more time in the areas in those direct and indirect student services? All these pieces connect, right? All of this framework is aligned. So if our weekly calendars reflect that we're doing a lot of program management and not a lot of direct student services, well, that's what our use of time is going to show. So how can we slowly make these shifts? And remembering that those small changes can make a big difference over time. And I've said it a lot of times, but don't be afraid of the results. If our use of time shows that we're really far from that 80-20 recommendation, it gives us a lot of room for improvement, right? If we're at 2080, then we can slowly move it forward, right? And that's okay. We just want to see where we are, because the worst thing we can do is not figure out where we are, because then we're not going to make any improvements. All right, just a quick note, if you're here and you are with School Counselor Corps, if you are hired on the School Counselor Corps grant, your student support specialist is going to be in contact with you about the requirements for your use of time calculator. Okay, so be on the lookout for information from your specialist, either Amy or Rebecca, Darshana, or Sarah. Okay, so if that applies to you, keep that in mind, and they'll be able to answer your grant requirement questions. But if you have specific questions on filling out the use of time calculator, you can ask me. They're your go-to with all grant questions. So, but we're all in this together, and we're going to figure it out together. All right, and that post test, let me put it in the chat so that you all will have that. Please take a moment to complete this, because this is how you can get your certificate for attending today. So, and I'll send it in an email for anyone who has had to leave us, but please get that completed. And as you do, let me tell you a little bit about the upcoming training and events we have. I've talked about this a lot. Please join us for those Delivering Student Services webinars. If you have questions about those different categories, counseling, instruction, and appraisal and advisement, we're going to dive deep in this 3-part series. So we're doing a different series for elementary school counselors and a different one for secondary schools. So these will link you to how to sign up, and we'll also send it in the follow-up email. Those will also be recorded if you can't join us live, but go ahead and register so you get the information. We also are continuing to offer coffee with counselors. This has been a great time to ask these more informal questions that you have. So please come to those, and we can talk more about completing this calculator and any other questions you may have. So we'll do that again in November and December, and we'll get those January 2023 dates out soon as well. And if you haven't heard, we have an amazing opportunity for you to continue to learn more through our OSDE Connect course on comprehensive school counseling. This is an asynchronous training platform that really allows you to dive deep into our framework. You can earn up to 20 professional development hours through this, and it's completely self-paced. So we have had a ton of you sign up, and it's been a great way for us to continue to learn more. It's self-paced, but I'm in the course room every day, so I'm responding and helping and doing all sorts of things to continue to help you and move your work forward. So you can sign up there. I'll be sure and include that link in the email I send. And then I mentioned these series, the data-driven series. You can still catch the recordings of that, and the summer series. This is where we talked about calendars and outcome goals and that annual administrative conference. So you have so many ways to continue to learn more. But if you need more, here are some great books and online learning we recommend as well. And with that, here's my contact information. You can always reach out. If I didn't get to your questions, I know there were a ton of them, please reach out. I am always happy to help. You can call or text that phone number. You can email me and just reach out if I can do anything to help you. Thank you for giving me an extra 13 minutes of your time today. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if you have any last minute questions. Otherwise, go ahead and email me, and Oh, we need the post test again. There it is, Tammy. Okay, well, thank you all for joining me, and I will see you all again next time. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.